So I saw this week FMCSA revoked two ELDs, ELD one and nationwide. I think that this is interesting. Like traditionally, FMCSA has not been very good at revoking ELDs.
Okay.
We have an ELD registered, and I think we do a good job, right, of maintaining that and making sure that it works per their guidelines. Right. I don't really know what to make of this news. Like either FMCSA is becoming a little bit more aggressive in their enforcement of these ELD self-certification rules, right? Because the way this works is as an ELD provider, you basically sign some documents and thoroughly test your technology and self-certify that it works. And then FMCSA monitors that as they enforce the ELD mandate, right? They're looking at your technology when they stop a truck to say, well, did the technology give us what we needed? And, did it meet all the requirements, right? And so I don't know what to make of this, right? Is FMCSA being more picky? Or are there some ELD providers that are just doing a really bad job at maintaining their tech and building their tech and making sure that it works? I will say, as a technology provider, it's pretty one, the rules aren't that clear. There's some contradictions in the rules that FMCSA has. I can understand how some of these things don't work, but here's the thing, right? As a provider, if they tell you that they think you're not in compliance, you have 60 days to communicate with them and get in compliance, right? So sometimes, and we haven't had this happen, but I think sometimes they can flag you by mistake, right? And you have to talk to them the carrier didn't install, he only had half the ELD installed, right? This isn't a technology issue as much as it is a user issue. So I think it's really interesting. What it does do is it leaves trucking companies in a really bad spot if you've invested in technology and then all of a sudden what you've invested in gets revoked. And this has happened before, right? ELD companies have gone out of business. There's way too many registered. It's there's more providers than can possibly make a living in this space.
And that was going to be my first question. How challenging, right? Since you've done it, since we offer ELD now, so how challenging is it to get a certification? I think you briefly explained that essentially you do self-certify, but some of the criteria can be, gray area, wishy-washy. And
getting the certification isn't the problem. Getting the certification is the easy part. Building the technology that meets the requirements is the hard part, and making sure that it works. And what we found works really well is you just have to be communicating with your drivers that are using it. And as they encounter weird stuff, right? Because it's one thing for developers to test it, and we can do all kinds of tests on technology. And I think anybody that builds technology can. You gotta account for all the real world factors that go into this, right? And so that I think is probably the most difficult part.
Right. And it's interesting because even though the ELD got revoked, the carriers, it's not like their service stops, right? They're just going to have to be forced to switch eventually, or
they just have to switch providers. They normally give them 60 days. Yeah. So anyway, it's kind of a pain for the truck.
Right. Regardless. Right. You've been paying all this money for an ELD, and all of a sudden, hey, sorry, you can't use this product anymore. You're put on short notice. You got to start shopping, looking for something else. Matt, any opinions on ELDs getting revoked, on this affecting, possibly, who knows how many fleets each ELD has, but this affecting fleets on the road?
Well, it just sounds like, from talking to Flint, who built, our ELD, it's easy to kind of get certified. It's easy to make one, easy to build one. It's hard to make it not suck, right? So, ultimately, you need something that works for drivers in the real world, and that's where the nuances of it really come into play. So,
right, yeah, and
there's just a lot of real world factors, right? There's do you have cell phone signal? Have you installed it correctly? There's a lot of stuff that's not really the developers in the developers' control, right? That come into play.
And do different makes and models have an effect on how it works?
Oh yeah, trucks have a huge effect. Trucks have because you're reading data from the ECM. So if the ECM's no good, right? If the ECM's old, like if you look at the like 2000, in our experience, like 2006 through 2008 model trucks are really bad because they started to put emissions equipment on those trucks, but they were still running a 250 baud rate CAN bus, which is a slow CAN bus, so it can't it's just trying to send too much information through a very narrow pipe. And so like there's a huge, this is what I mean by real world factors, right?
Right.
Like
you got it.
It's hard to handle, and then you always have these guys, these trucks that are like, well, we've changed the engine. It was a 2005, and we threw an engine in from 1999, but it still has the ECM from 2005, and you're like, guys, I mean,
right, yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you're watching this and you're thinking about starting an ELD, keep these things in mind. Or alternatively, if you're a driver, owner, and operator, and you are in a truck that had a ELD revoked, leave a comment down below. Like, talk to us. How did the process in your fleet go switching through, or switching providers, switching ELD providers? I'd be very curious to see, because obviously, this is sometimes the benefit of going with like the big name brands. You know what I mean? Like you're probably certain that when you're going with one of the bigger ones, they're probably not going to get revoked, you know? And,
they might not get revoked, but they also might not work that well either. Right? That's the thing. Like,
right.
I just said, it's super important that you have an open communication line and that your provider is like taking your feedback and acting on it. And I think you lose that with the really big guys.
Right. With the big guys, for sure. Sometimes you try to, hey, I have this issue, they put you in a queue and they take an extended period to respond. Yeah. Or also oftentimes what some of the bigger ELDs do is they just limit your features. I know what ELD I was using, like they allowed for no personal conveyance at all. They allowed for no personal conveyance. So if you accidentally drove and you forgot to log it as personal conveyance, you couldn't like switch it afterwards to personal conveyance. So it seems like, there's companies are navigating these waters differently.